Hello and welcome to Believe TV. My name is Bruce Sampson and I am your host and will be your host for the foreseeable future. Thank you guys for tuning in, whether you're watching live or on replay. It is very much appreciated. I appreciate your time. Um, as they say, when you're flying, you know how they'll say, we realize that you have a choice, so that you could have chosen to fly any number of airlines, but you chose us. So thank you so much. So I guess that's what I'm saying is that you could choose to watch any number of things right now, especially online. And I appreciate that you've taken out some time to spend with me. So for those of you who have never tuned in, Believe TV is an interactive platform where we talk about a number of things. Our motto is to embrace the possible. My desire always is to have discussions and interviews and interactions with our audience and with others who come on as special guests that will educate, inspire, enlighten us, and bring us closer together. And so today's episode um, is really just me sharing some things with you. Today, we're talking about fear, especially here in the year of 2020. Like, what is identifying fears and how we deal with those fears. I encourage you as I share with you my thoughts and pose my questions for you to join in and say hello and to share your thoughts as well. Even if it's just to say hi and to let me know that you're there, it's very much appreciated. So let's begin with, actually, let me get that out of the way. That's better. Okay, so um, I've been thinking about fear quite a bit over this last week, especially. It's come up a number of times, obviously throughout this year. 2020 has been uh, special. Let's just use that word for now. So it has been special. It has been, we have faced a number of unique challenges, and we have been presented with a number of unique opportunities. Um, and I recognize that I have an international audience. So I have friends from other countries that also watch this show. And I thank you guys so much for tuning in. Um, while much of what I'm going to say can be viewed across the spectrum and will make sense, in large part, I'm going to be focusing primarily on the United States and what's happening here. Again, if you're just tuning in, feel free to drop in and just say hi and let us know where you are and where you're viewing from. That's always appreciated. Um, so we're talking about fear. Fear, as I was saying before, has come up a number of different times for me over this past week through discussions and through watching different shows and programs and through what I've read. It keeps popping up. And so that's what I wanted to talk about this week. That's what I wanted this week to be the focus of. And right on cue, my good friend, Miss Karen uh, from Germany. Hi there. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you being here. My good friend from Germany. Thank you so much. Um, so just like she set the example, feel free to pop in and say hi. It's always appreciated. And again, let me know where you're viewing from. That's always helpful to know. So trying to think the best way to start with this, but ultimately, I was thinking about history. So I'm a big fan of history. That was one of my favorite subjects in school, and has always been something that I've been fascinated by is history, United States history and world history. And I will admit, and I've said this before on this program, that I'm not one of those people who remembers um, necessarily specific dates or even places, or is like geographically sound. Like I can't point to you on the map and go, oh, this is where this is, and this is where that happened, and that sort of thing. It's like, no, I tend to look at things in terms of the big picture. Um, how it impacted, like what things made a difference in the world, what things were going on that led to these these things coming together that then manifests itself in a certain way and then changed mankind or had an impact on humankind, right? So that's how I tend to look at history, and that's how I tend to view it. So if you were to come to me and say, hi, Miss Greeley, Miss Sharon, good to hear from you as well. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Um, so yeah, so if you were to ask me something specific like, when was the battle of this, I don't know. I probably couldn't tell you. I can give you some roundabout stuff, and I could probably tell you the gist of, why this came about or that came about, um, or what have you, that sort of thing. But getting down into the nitty gritty, I'm the same way with the Bible. Um, like if I'm not one of those people who can quote and tell you chapter and verse and where to find stuff. But if you bring up a particular verse to me, I can usually speak fairly intelligently about it with you. Okay. So that's how I think and all of that. Hi, Minas. Thank you for tuning in. Yay. Is this your first time watching? Thank you. And she's watching from California. My friend Sharon, I know you're in Louisiana. I'm trying to think, are you in Slidell or Baton Rouge or New Orleans? I'm not really sure. But anyway, so just thinking about history and what I wanted to address today with regards to history and fear, and I'm going to get to that part in a second, but I wanted to put it in this context. Think about history. Think about when you're studying history in school, right? Think about the issues. Hi, Dee Dee. Thank you for tuning in and watching. And Mina says, yes, this is her first time. Yay. Oh, you're in Homa. Miss Sharon's in Homa. Oh, okay. Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. So when we think about history, learning history, so for those of us who are from the United States and we studied American history, right? So, or just history in general, right? So we learn about these facts and these names, these figures, people who did certain things, and Washington crossed the Delaware, and and this person was a hero in this war, and all these different things, right? And sometimes the way we view history from a distance, right? So most of the time we're looking at history from a distance. So something that happened 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, what have you, right? And so we're thinking it from that standpoint. And oftentimes, if we're really honest with ourselves, we're probably judging the people of that time. Think about it. Have there ever been times, anything that you studied in history that you looked at and you wondered, how could those people have done that? Or how could those people have allowed that to happen? Or what was that like to go through that? One of the things I want to use the word amused by, but please understand the context of what I'm saying. So I want to address slavery for a second. So in slavery, one of the things that I have historically, I mean, as long as I can remember, even as a kid, I'd always be amazed because there would always be someone, some friend or some classmate or somebody who would say something to the effect of, man, I couldn't have been a slave back in the day because, the first time they would have hit me with a whip, I would have been right back on them and all this stuff. As if those thoughts didn't enter the minds of the people who were slaves in America during that time, right? So it's funny how people will sometimes put things in context. So they're judging the people of that time, and why didn't they do this? Why didn't they fight back? Why didn't this? Why didn't that? And oftentimes it's because they lack perspective and context. And I talk about that a lot because it's important. Context and perspective are very important in how we look at anything and we judge anything, right? It's important because if you don't have context and you don't have perspective, you don't have a complete picture of what's happening. You're misinformed or ill-informed, underinformed, whatever you want to call it, right? And so one of the things I use, one of the examples I've used in the past with regards to, like, let's say the Bible. If you hear the story about, and there are a few different stories about Samaritans in the Bible, right? You know, the Good Samaritan, right? We hear these stories and we think we understand them. But if you don't understand the context of the relationship between the Jews and the Samaritans at that time, then you don't get a full picture of what was going on. You think you know. You think you have an idea. You know, you have a base level concept of, yeah, it was this and this is the story behind that. Well, no, you don't really understand the full impact. Hey, Miss Pat, how you doing? Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. So you don't have if you don't have that full context of what that means. That's why I've always been a big fan of really great teachers. And so in college, I would sometimes take multiple classes from certain teachers just because of the way they taught, because they provided context. They provided perspective that gave me a deeper understanding of, oh, now I really, really understand it now. Now I get it. Because if you don't have that, like you and I, let's say we're both talking about, the Samaritans. And if you only understand a base level of what the story is, but I understand the context and the perspective of the relationship between the Samaritans and the Jews and who the Samaritans actually were, then we're having a conversation that is really not going to go where it could potentially go because you don't have that perspective. You don't understand the context. So when I say something, you're like, you can't relate to it because you don't understand the context of it, right? So, and Ms. Pat says exactly. Yeah. So context and perspective are very, very important in all of that. So same thing with history, right? And the Bible is history, right? So, but thinking about, studying history. So when we're in elementary school, you learn, some history, you learn some very basic things and some basic concepts and stories. And then when you're in junior high and high school, you learn those stories all over again, but with more context, right? And then if you go to college, especially if you major in history, well, now you're going to get even more context and more perspective, which will enlighten how you view certain situations. And if you have someone else to the side who, all they ever got was the elementary basics of that piece of history, then they're never going, like, you can argue with them and they're going to think they're right, but they won't be because they don't have a full context of it. And they don't know that there's another context. So having said that, one of the things that I was thinking about with regard to history and talking about how people are judged, because in the future, people will look, like now we look back on history, we study history and we look at things that happened in the past and we place certain judgments on it, the decisions that were made. And the more context we have and the more perspective we have on it, the more enlightened those views are, right? So what I wonder about the time we're living in now, 2020, with everything that we're facing, everything that we're going through this year with the pandemic, coronavirus, COVID-19, all of that, with the division in our country with regards to politics and elections, the division with regards to race relations, and any number of other things that have come up over this year. Because a lot of things have come up that have been polarizing, that have made us kind of choose a side and say, well, this is how we feel about it. We're taking a position. And one of the things that I continually have to remind myself is, one, Bruce, you must continue to make sure that you yourself are informed, that you have context, and that you have perspective, that you understand whomever you're speaking to about this topic. You understand what their perspective is. Where did they get their information? How much information do they have? Because if they don't get it, then they're going to have a whole different point of view. I've mentioned this several times before, but I'm going to give you a quick little example. So I mentioned that years and years ago when I was going to college in New Orleans, and back then I listened to a lot of talk radio. And I was listening to this show on WTIX. And the gentleman was talking, and it was in February. I think it was around the month of February. And he was making an argument of why do we have Black History Month, and saying that it just made no sense. And in his mind, Blacks hadn't made any contributions, blah, 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 blah. Now, this was a show that I listened to quite regularly and found amusing. And there were times when this gentleman would have certain topics that I would find, informative. Like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. That's really informative. When it came to this topic, I knew just from listening to him that he lacked perspective. He lacked information. So he's speaking from a place of ignorance, right? And so there was no reason for me to be angry with him because he didn't have the information. Now, it's an entirely different thing if you have the information, you have the perspective and context, and you still choose a certain path that may be destructive or that may be hateful or what have you. Then I'm going to judge you and look at you differently, right? I'm going to put that into the mix of how I view you as a human being, as a person, and even to determine whether or not I even want to engage with you because of where you stand and what you're saying. So in this particular instance, we had a man who was on the radio, and he had an audience of people who listened to him and who viewed him as a source of good information. And they used the information that he spewed as a basis for their understanding of certain topics. And so here we are talking about the contributions of African Americans to America. And he had a particular point of view that I clearly knew was uninformed and misinformed. So he said, everything that's happened in this country for African Americans has happened to our benefit. So we haven't contributed anything. We've just been on the receiving end of all the good stuff and all this stuff. And so for the first time after listening to this guy, for the better part of a year, I finally pulled over and called the guy, on the air. And we had a conversation. And I explained to him that he was misinformed. And he put me on the spot, and he said, name somebody, aside from, the handful of folks, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, blah, 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 whatever. Name someone. And so I'm like, okay. And I started naming people like Dr. Charles Drew, Benjamin Banneker, and others. And he'd never heard of those people. And so I went on to explain who they were. And he thought I was making them up. I'm like, no, look it up. And keep in mind that during this time, the internet was still in an infancy stage. You know what I mean? Like, still relatively new. We didn't have iPhones yet. We had cell phones, but we didn't have, iPhones yet. We didn't have certain technology just that we could just go, hey, Google, blah, blah, blah. I don't even think we had Google yet, to be honest, when this was happening. And so, we have another guest. There's a difference between being ignorant and being willfully ignorant and spreading one's ignorance. Yes, absolutely. And that's what I was referring to when I was saying, you get to that point where, or at least I get to that point where I determine whether or not I even want to engage with you, or whether engaging with you, or how I'm going to engage with you, right? So how I'm going to engage with you. So if I all of a sudden understand through what you said that, oh, you have no idea what you're talking about. You're in an infant stage of ignorance. And when I say ignorance, I don't mean that in an insulting fashion, like to name call someone. It's like, no, ignorance is a state of being. It is a state of not knowing certain information. I am ignorant about certain things. There's certain things that I am very intelligent about, and there are certain things that I consider myself to be an expert on. And then there are other things that I am woefully ignorant on. Like if you told me, to like the workings of a combustion engine, of a car, there are only certain things I know. Like I know how to refill the oil. I know how to put in transmission fluid. I know, that, the belt, the timing belt and things need to be changed. I don't know how to do those things. And I don't know how to do surgery. I don't know certain legal things. There's certain things that I am woefully ignorant about. And it's simply because I've never studied that. I've never been taught that. I've never gone into any great depths or lengths to find out that information and to become informed about it. And it is amazing to me that while I can admit that and I can say that out front, there are so many people that they just can't do it. Just can't do it. It's not a bad thing to say, I'm ignorant about that. I don't know about that. It's the reason that we go to specialists. It's the reason we have these different businesses like mechanics, right? We go to mechanics because we want an expert to handle our vehicle. We don't want to get under there and mess something up. And so, there's certain things we'll do. Like I said, changing oil, no, I won't even change my oil. I'll add oil, but changing oil is a whole different thing. So yeah, I'm not doing that. So I'm going to go to a specialist for that. For medical reasons, if there's something wrong with me physically or emotionally or what have you, I want to go to an expert who is going to help me process through that situation and figure out what is wrong with me and what do I need to do to get better, right? I want an expert. I don't want some random Joe Schmo who's said, oh yeah, I was watching The Simpsons and they did this on The Simpsons. So like, dude, that's not valuable information. That doesn't help me, So, but it's amazing to me how many people I encounter who, speaking of somebody very intelligent, it's my old classmate. It's Tanya Lewis Bickham. Yeah, very, very smart. Yeah, there's a whole lot of subjects that I'm like, I will bow to you. You are definitely much more intelligent than me on these certain areas. But it is amazing to me how many people, especially in this day and age, are satisfied with whatever information they get, especially cookie cutter information that comes in the form of a tweet or comes in the form of, just a headline. Won't actually read the article. Just read the headline and go, yeah, I got it. No, you don't. No, you don't. And you still might even have it if you read the entire article, right? But you certainly don't have it just looking at the headline. The headline isn't enough, right? So, and I know a lot of you are probably going, what does this have to do with fear? What are you talking about? I swear I'm going to get there. Just hang in there with me. So the whole thing is about how, so this historical exploration that I'm talking about right now has to deal with how we view things and people and instances in history. And Miss Vera, this is, I should say Dr. Vera Williams. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you. I want to get you on the show. In fact, I almost called you the other day to have you join me. But I do want to get you on here because I watched your show Friday night, and very informative. She does a show talking about health, and it's so informative. I've learned so much. In fact, she's given suggestions and stuff that have made me go, "Ooh, I need to do that," or "Ooh, I've been really bad on that." Again, going to someone who's an expert, right? Another example, right? Someone who's an expert knows what they're talking about. Well, that's who I want to talk to. Just like I'm probably not going to go to my mechanic and say, "Okay, tell me whether or not I should take the coronavirus vaccine when it comes out." Dude, I don't trust like there are certain things you are an expert on, but there are other things that you're ignorant to, you know, or that I'm going to assume based on the fact of your lack of a medical degree, you know. So again, growing up, there were certain things that you just understood and you knew, and you're like, well, of course, we go to an expert. And even with the experts, we want to make sure, if I'm going to go to a doctor, I'm going to look on the wall and I want to see their certificate and I want to see the awards they've gotten and that sort of thing, right? Before we're like, okay, I'm going to trust you to do this procedure or whatever, I'm going to need to know some things about you. And I'm going to have to check with a few people that I respect that are your patients to see, okay, well, what's the deal? Oh, okay, well, great. Well, now I'll take a shot with you because I trust what those people have said. And yeah, so Scott says, I think I know where you're going. Fear is often born of ignorance. Absolutely. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert, retreat into advance, as oh, I got you, as FDR said. Right, right. Um, so yes, yeah. So yes, yes, you're definitely on the right track of where I'm going with all this. So we've established that we look at the past in a certain way, and that we look to experts and all of that. So I think we've established that well enough. So the question is, how will history view us? How will people in the future, 100 years from now, maybe not even that far, but let's just say 100 years in the future, when they're looking at the history books at this point in time, what will they say about us? When they hear the stories of what large swaths of people chose to do or not do, the actions and inactions of people, how will they view us? So when I think about history, I think about that. How will we be viewed? Because I can go, just as far back as, for example, the modern day civil rights movement, right? When I say modern day, I mean, what happened in the 60s, primarily 60s, 70s, right? So I have a whole collection of pictures. I even thought about showing them, and I went, I don't want it to go down that path. But there's so many pictures that were taken that were in Life magazine and newspapers and other magazines and stuff that exist now that show people very strongly, passionately taking a point of view that in large part now people would say that doesn't make any sense. No, we don't agree with that. No, that's wrong. Right? And that's going to be true in the future as well. Because, and I can say that with all confidence because of how divided we are, right? We are so divided. We have huge swaths of people who have certain viewpoints about the very same thing that we're all going through and that we're looking at. And you have people on this side who feel a certain way, and you have people on this side who feel a certain way, and they feel strongly and passionately that their point of view is right. And at the end of the day, 100 years from now, people will look back and be able to judge and say, ooh, that particular group of people were way off. And why were they way off? What made them go down that path? And that's one of the things that's fascinating to me in history. So when I study history, it's not just the dates and the names and stuff and the famous battles or whatever. It's the psychology behind it. It's like, what were people thinking? What were they going through? What were they, what colored that point of view? What informed them to take that stance? And like, think about the Civil War. There were people who, or any war for that matter, people who are willing to go into battle against their countrymen, in some cases against family members, over something they felt supremely passionate about. And there are a great many people now, there are a great many people nowadays, I would hope, that would look back at that time and say, ooh, yeah, that group of people they were wrong. They were clearly wrong. But unfortunately, in 2020, we have found that there are a lot of people who feel the opposite. And it is that whole thing about how are they informed and how much of that information was and their actions were informed by fear, right? So, like Mr. Scott said, yeah. So, how much of that was informed by fear? And I would wager that a lot of it, that a lot of what we live through and what we're going through this year, especially, is informed by fear. So, whether we're talking about, Colin Kaepernick taking a knee at a football game, whether we're talking about whether or not to wear a mask, whether we're talking about certain political ideologies, whatever it is, what informs that opinion? What informs that? And oftentimes, what you will find is fear, afraid of something, afraid of, and usually there's someone out there who's helping to fan those flames of fear. And so, some of the fears, really, when you get down to it, are really irrational. They don't make sense. Or at least they don't make sense now, right? Think about it. Clearly there are things that I think each of us can say that when we were children, that when we were young, that we were afraid of, that we're not afraid of now. And we look at those now as, oh, well, that was an irrational fear. Well, it wasn't irrational at the time, because at the time, whatever you were informed by meant, well, no, I don't want to get hurt, so I'm not doing that. Or no, that will end up in this result, and I don't want that result. Or this is this, and that is that. So wait a minute, hold on. Miss Karen said, I think she's saying, I think some will say that's a long time ago, so they don't have interest. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Some people are like that. Yeah, they just have no interest in it. Like I know a lot of my friends, coming up through school and stuff, didn't really care for history. Just like I wasn't a big fan of science, to be honest. Now, I didn't deny science. I wasn't afraid of science. I just didn't have a great deal of interest in it. It didn't pique. Some things did. Some things, some classes and certain things, we learned in science class, were interesting to me, and other things weren't. And so, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so fear. F is false. E is expectation. A is appearing, and R real. False expectation appearing real. Yeah. Wow, that's cool. I've never seen that before. Thank you for that. That's cool. So, yeah, how much do we do based on fear? In fact, I can give you some other examples. Think about let's talk about elections for a second. So we've had elections in the past, and right now I'm going to go back to JFK. So there was a fear, a major fear, that when he ran for president, there was this whole thing, for those of you who study history and know this, that a lot of people in America were very afraid of having a Catholic president, because the the common thing that will be said is that the United States will be ruled from the Vatican, meaning the Pope would decide our laws and our rules and all of that stuff. Um, I'm sorry, so that's what I was trying to type, Patricia. Thanks, my phone was acting crazy. That's cool. Um, but yeah, but if you think back to that, there was this big fear of like, oh my gosh, everything's going to change. Everyone's going to be turned into Catholics, and it's going to be, you know, the Pope will be ruling from from the Vatican and Rome and all this different stuff, right? And people were legit afraid, right? And upset, and they had this is something that's going to happen, and oh no, if he gets elected, well, none of that happened, right? Nothing happened. There are a number of things that happen in every election that people put out these fear things of, if you elect that person, this is going to happen. If you elect that person, that's going to happen. And oftentimes, most of the time, some of those fear tactics that are used tend not to bear themselves out, right? That no, and oftentimes there are reasons why. Like, for instance, in politics, right? So was it last week that I did the questions, or was it the week before, where we did the questions, and one of the questions was, what are the three branches of U.S. government? And some people didn't know. Um, and yes, I'm giving you a hard time because you need to know that. If you don't know, I mean, you should know that. And if you don't know that, then make it your business to find out, because we need to be informed about our government. Again, it's the same thing. You need to know in order to make good decisions, so that when you go to vote, you are informed. Oh, it was last week, Ms. Tanya said it was last week. So yeah. So anyway, let me move on because I'm getting stuck into this history thing. Um, so last week I also, or this past week, I've had a couple discussions with different friends. And I'm not going to disclose their names or too much about what we talked about, but some of it just had to do with me just reaching out and saying, "Hey, I just want to know. These were people that I trusted to just tell me the straight up truth, not to tell me stuff that they thought I wanted to hear or what have you, and that I had a deal of respect for. So I just wanted to know some answers to some different things about one, what their view was of me. You know, one of the questions I asked, well, what's your earliest memory of me and any encounter with me or being aware of my existence, and what was your thought about me at that time, and whatever. And part of it's just because I've been doing a lot of self-reflection, and just thinking about choices I've made and how I've treated people, and things that I've done, and what have you. In one of those discussions, I'm talking with this friend, and this particular friend said to me somewhere, I don't know what really launched this part of the conversation, but this person said to me, I view you, at least now, as a person who, I don't know if she used the word fearless, but it was something to that effect of being brave, courageous. And I'm like, really? I don't think of myself that way at all. Because there's plenty of stuff I'm afraid of, and I will tell you straight up, and like, yeah, nope, 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 not doing that. I'll tell you straight up, snakes. I don't deal with rodents. I don't deal with insects or reptiles. Not a fan. And you can say whatever you want. You can call me whatever name you want to. Doesn't matter. Yeah, I don't like them. So Whatever. Call me chicken. Cluck, cluck, cluck. I don't care. That's just straight up. I don't like any of those. So, but anyway, she said that about me, and she went on to say that because she felt that, um, like in this platform that I have, that I come out and I say things that I feel, I and that I've led different events and platforms and things that, um, I step out and say, well, I'm just going to take a chance and I'm just going to come out and say this and hope that people will listen, hope that people will follow, hope that people will understand where I'm coming from, and I'm just going to go for it. And so that's where she got the whole thing about me being fearless. And I'm like, oh, I said, well, let me explain to you something. Now, you may say I'm courageous because to me, some of you will know that definition. I don't know who came up with it, but that definition of courageous meaning to move on. I'm probably not going to live that down. I knew as soon as I did it. Cluck, cluck, cluck. Keep being. um, anyway, oh, it just made me forget what I was saying. No, but courageous is doing something. It's not that you're not afraid. It's that you're doing something despite that, right? So I can say that that's true in certain situations, but I can also say that there have been any number of situations, and I'll even say just in my everyday life that there are certain choices that I make, and they stem from fear. Even though I know when I'm in my solitude and I'm thinking and I'm just reflecting and praying and whatever, that I realize that it's an irrational fear, and that I know I have right on my side, and I know that there's no reason for me to be afraid when I'm speaking the truth, but yet I still am. And it's because I recognize that not everyone operates that way. There are huge swaths of people who don't operate that way. They don't look at stuff that way. So, like, I appreciate, like, I have some friends who pretty clearly have a different, let's just say, political ideology from myself, for the most part. Um, and also, just for the record, just so people know, because people assume certain things about me that aren't actually true. For instance, my parents were registered lifelong Democrats. I have been, from the moment I registered, I have been and will continue to be a registered independent. That doesn't mean I belong to the independent party. It means I am an independent. I make my own decisions. I don't necessarily listen to a particular party and that party dictates how I feel or believe about things. I listen to representatives from different parties and what they have to say. And if it lines up with what I believe and view, then I'll vote for them, or I'll vote for that statute, or whatever it is. So I voted for people in any number of parties. And I know plenty of people who only vote one party. And they'll say, my parents voted that way, my grandparents voted that way, and my great grandparents voted that way. So I'm voting that way too. you know, and everybody has their right to do, whatever they want. Spirit said ditto for me. Which one's the ditto? Is it the independent thing or is it something else? Miss Vera, I'm just curious what you were dittoing. But yeah, so I put the responsibility on my own shoulders to say, so therefore, in order for me to participate in any voting, and us as independent, hey, I didn't know we had that in common. Awesome. We definitely should talk sometime, and I definitely should have you on the show sometime. Um, so yeah, I have, if it lines up with how I feel and whatever, then that's how I vote. Um, and I will tell you straight up, there are things and people that I voted for that I'm like, later on, my perspective changed and like, ooh, that was a bad choice, you know? And I freely admit it. Like, yeah, that was a bad choice. And I'll tell you what one of them was. And this may be informative to some of you about my current stance. But for those of you who remember Ross Perot, when Ross Perot ran for president. And so that was kind of the first time that we actually had a real three-party kind of thing going for a minute. And then it all imploded and whatever. So I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but Ross Perot was this millionaire billionaire who was coming in and running because he was going to fix issues with our budget, and we had a huge deficit at the time, and so he was going to come in and fix stuff because he's like, I'm a businessman, I know what I'm doing, let me come in and I'll fix this right up. And so I won't even lie to you, just straight up, I voted for Ross Perot. I did not vote for Bill Clinton. And who was it? Was it Papa Bush? I think. Yeah, I think it was Papa Bush. Um, hey, Bob. Hey, my friend. Good to see you, man. Um, I think I mentioned to you last time. I love looking at your pictures and stuff of your family and stuff. It's just beautiful. Makes me happy to see my friends happy. um, yeah. Anyway, um, so sorry, I just lost my point of view, my thought again. Anyway, so again, let's jump back to fear specifically. So fear makes us do things, and so what I want from this whole discussion is to put out the word of um, that one, no, and I told my friend this, that I am not fearless. I'm definitely afraid. And here, that's what I want to talk about. So the irrational fear. So what's irrational about some of the fears I have to do with the fact that there are situations where, because of what I do in the world, in terms of Bill Clinton and Bob Dole. Oh, okay. Was that the one? Okay. So anyway, because of what I do in the world in terms of the Believe camps and the Unity Project and all of that. And I had a friend point this out to me too, a different friend point this out to me a while back, saying, you need to stop being so careful in your language and how you speak about things. And with the thought being that I'm being too measured and that I'm not fully speaking the truth because I'm being so measured. Whereas I will admit that, as I'm admitting now, that fear comes into play, and I will explain this in a second. I will continue to go on being measured because I want to be precise. I want to say the right thing. I don't want to say something and then people go off half-cocked thinking I said or meant one particular thing when I'm like, oh, I didn't really mean it that way. I meant this. So I'm always going to try to be measured in the language that I use and what I say and what I don't say, as well as sometimes even politically, like who I will, like generally speaking, I don't generally anymore. I used to when I was younger, but I generally now don't publicly come out for any particular candidates. I just don't. I don't endorse anyone. Um, that may change, but thus far, I generally don't anymore. There was a period of time when I would actually go work for candidates. I mean, not work for them, but I'd actively go out, put out signs, pass out flyers, and actively try to recruit people and inform people about particular candidates for office. Now I don't, and it's in large part because I look at Believe, and I know that the good that we're doing with young people, and I know the good that we're doing in communities, because people tell me. Yesterday I had two different people. Um, uh, I was picking up food. One was me going through a drive-through, and I won't tell you which one it was. I was going through a drive-through, and one of the managers there, explained to me that, hey, my little girl is, she's ready to go. And I instantly knew he was talking about the Believe camps, and I said, yeah, I said, as soon as we get the word that it's clear and that it's safe, we'll move forward. You know, the reason we didn't do it this year, a physical camp, was because it wasn't safe. You know, there were too many questions, and I was not about to risk those kids or even my staff, you know, when we didn't know certain things, and I didn't know that we could adequately protect kids in that environment. We needed to sit down and think that through. And luckily, we've had a lot of time, and we will continue to think through how we do things going forward with the camp. But I know, and I don't mean this in a pat myself on the back kind of thing, but I know that what I do through Believe and through Unity are good things. I've prayed on it, and I believe God has spoken to me and worked through me. And I believe strongly that, um, well, I've gotten feedback from people telling me, that it's made a difference for them. And so, but let me tell you, every one of those steps, especially Unity, I was afraid. I'm not afraid, but there was a fear of, by stepping out and taking a stance, taking a stand, a particular position, that anyone who felt threatened by that position would then say, "Oh, well, I'm not sending my kids to your camp." I mean, and I know that because I've actually had it happen during camps, where I've actually had parents come to me telling me at one point or another, yeah, I'm going to let my kids, finish out this week of camp, but they're probably not going to come back anymore, because in their viewpoint, they didn't like the way something was said, or they heard something from their kid about discussions. That one of the things we do in our camp is we break down songs. So we talk about lyrics and what they mean, and people express, and the kids are allowed to express their viewpoints, with no judgment. you know they're allowed to say, this is how I feel about this. This is, whatever. Okay, great. Well, because some kids express a certain point of view, the parents immediately went, "Oh, well, we can't have that. You can't, they can't talk about that point of view in front of my children." You know, like, well, they didn't say anything bad, and we had adults in the room to guide the conversation. And they had, based on that little sliver of information of what their kid said about another kid saying during the class, made them chalk up that we were, I don't know, leftist, communist, whatever. I don't know what you want to call it. Whatever they thought we were and what we were doing. And then those same people came up to me after the show, after we finished out the week and done our show, and they told me, basically apologized and said, "I'm sorry. I totally changed my mind. That show changed my mind completely." And the funny thing was, I knew exactly what it was. I knew exactly what changed their mind. And it's because in that particular show, we had some parts of our show that have to do, we showed respect to the military. And, we talked about patriotism. That was one of the components. We also talked about faith. And those things were in the show. And so now I'm okay. It's like, no, I was always okay. You just weren't fully informed, and you jumped to a conclusion. And that's the fear. is that people will jump to a conclusion and then belief goes away. And my fear, let me be very clear on this. My fear is not that, oh, I lose this thing, my toy, my what, no. Or that it makes a lot of money for me. It does not. Trust me, it does not. It's not about that. Again, it's because I believe firmly in what we're doing and the benefit it has to those children and to the communities we serve. And it's always the weighing of, okay, well, is it more important that I take a stand with this, and go out there and risk it? Or is it better to think big picture long term and be able to continue to offer that service when I believe that it's a good thing, and I know it's a good thing. Oh, let me catch up here. My friend Bob is saying we tend to fear most what we cannot control, but we all should try to turn fear into challenge. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I've actually tried to change my language with regard to that. Instead of saying, I'm afraid of something or something is whatever, I just say it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Once we accomplish that challenge, we are rid of fear. Believe in your actions and just go for it. So yes, sometimes it's hard. It gives me pause. Trust me. We must not stay in our comfort zones. Yeah, I mean, and that's hard. That's hard, especially in this day and age, to tell people to come outside their comfort zones. And, I'm always talking about listening to one another, like truly, truly listening, the importance of that. Truly hearing what we have to say beyond the slogans, beyond the catchphrases, beyond the tweets. Wait a second. No, let's stop and let's talk. And let me understand why you feel that way. What is that born from? And what is your fear? What are you afraid of? Because maybe I can help you come down off that fear by explaining to you certain things that you don't understand. And maybe you can do that for me. So that's that thing in communication. Fear is an acronym. Oh, here's a different acronym. Because that Francis did one other. Oh, so it's basically the same kind of thing. False evidence appearing real. Yeah. Someone else did it slightly different than that. I don't remember. False expectation appearing real is what the other person said. But yeah, false evidence appearing real. So yeah, that acronym. And I don't know why I never heard that before, those acronyms before. But yeah. So anyway, I'm running out of time, and there's so much that I want to say. But at the end of the day, one of the things I just want to encourage folks is, you guys, there used to be a time when we valued knowledge. We valued the integrity of experts, of people who studied, people who made it their business to know certain things. And we still do on certain levels. We do. Like I mentioned before, we go to a mechanic we trust to deal with our car rather than doing it ourselves, or having, your teenager work on the car or whatever, whatever, right? And there are other areas, we go to to have dental work done. You go to someone that you trust that has studied dentistry, right? And has some kind of background, some demonstration of a level of competency, right? So, but it's amazing to me how often that same type of thing flies out the window because of fear, because someone has made you afraid of something. And so therefore, oh, well then I'm not listening to doctors, I'm not listening to the foremost, expert in their field. They've got to be lying. Like, come on, man. And when we see the evidence and we see stuff that's happening and the numbers going out, and then they were predicted, like, if you keep doing this is what's going to happen. And guess what? The numbers started rising. More people are dying. And so much of it's just because we choose fear. And so, or we pick which fear, we're going to respond to. So rather than responding to the fear of death and the fear of of causing harm to others, we have latched on to this, I would call, irrational fear of losing our rights. And what's so funny about it is, and I'm not even going to get into all of this, but I could do a whole series of episodes about how it's like the magic trick, sleight of hand. It's like the trick is always to get you to focus on this hand while I'm doing something with this one, right? So you're looking over here, and the magic trick is actually happening over here, right? The trick is actually happening over here. That's the, and that gives you the illusion of something, right? And oftentimes that's exactly what's happening to us with regards to politics and government and the way we view certain things that are happening in the world, is that we're so busy focused on that thing and thinking that that's the issue, that's the thing to be afraid of, when in fact it ain't that. You're missing it. The stuff, that the real damage is happening behind your back and you don't even see it because you're so focused on that. And again, a lot of it comes down to listening and going beyond just what you're comfortable listening to, right? Of 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 stepping out and saying, I want to hear other people's points of view. And I want to understand how you derived at that decision. Where did that come from? Right? Show me where that information is. And doing the research myself. I've been so proud of, like I was mentioning earlier, I was starting to get into a thing where I have friends who have different political points of view, who I still consider to be very dear friends. It's like, that's okay. Have a different point of view. That's great. That used to be something we celebrated about this country. And now all of a sudden it's turned into this evil thing, and people are evil if they don't agree with your particular point of view or your thoughts, your ideology, right? At the end of the day, the one thing I've learned in traveling the United States and interacting with people, and in traveling the world and interacting with all kinds of people of all different stripes, is that at the end of the day, we have more in common than we don't. Much more in common. We have the same dreams, desires, all of that stuff, that and wants for ourselves, for our children, for our loved ones, for our friends, for our businesses, for our cities, our towns. We ultimately want all the same stuff. The question is always, how do we get there? And sometimes there are forces at play that have other agendas. They have a more personal agenda. It's more about them than it is us collectively. And they will often drag us down a rabbit hole into believing things and being afraid of things that's not what you should be afraid of. You should be afraid of this other stuff and be aware that somehow those folks are benefiting personally from your fear and from your action or inaction. And again, I just want to, we're at the end of the program. So I just want to say thank you again for listening. And I hope on some level this has helped some of you. And I hope that we can truly get to a place where we can do the smart, reasonable things in the short term so that the long-term impact and effect is one that's good for everyone. And stop being so afraid of doing the common sense stuff, that if you step back and just do the common sense stuff. Ms. Vera says, I totally get it. Oh, I know you do. Some of what I'm saying is coming from listening to your show. And that's why I want to have you on, because you brought up some very interesting things that I hadn't fully processed. Like, the whole Tuskegee experiment, all of that, and how that fear comes into play and the decisions that we make, as a culture, all of that. So um, please, in the short term, wear a mask. Please practice social distancing. If anything, we should be putting pressure on our representatives, our congressmen, our senators especially, to do what is right for us now, because I don't think they are right now. It's serving certain entities, but it's not serving us all. And there are a lot of people day by day that are losing their homes, they're losing their businesses, and lots of people are losing their lives because of the games that are being played, and how people are manipulating our fear. So we need to recognize our fear and then find ways to combat that fear. And the best way is through knowledge. It's through knowledge. And you achieve that by listening, by reading, by researching, not just picking one source and saying, well, that's where I get all my information from. Then you're probably misinformed. Then you're probably missing out on some stuff. So I I wish you all the best. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, whether you're watching this live or on replay, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I have to say. I hope it blesses you in some way. It's been therapeutic for me. And we can get through this. We're going to get through this, without getting too preachy. It's a mighty God I serve that already knows the end of the story, that knows how this all turns out. So it's all going to be okay, but we've been granted free will, and we have to use it wisely. So I wish you all the best. Please stay safe. Pray for those around you, and let's take care of one another and understand that wearing a mask is partially about you, but it's mostly about everybody else. And also to recognize, I'm going to say this one last thing. I'm sorry, I have to say this before I go. And I know I'm over time, so I apologize. But let's understand that our leaders, that, like, for instance, school board, superintendent, mayors, um, governors, what have you, for the most part, these people are doing their best in a very difficult situation. And it's not fair to attack these people because of your fears or because of your particular interest. We're all going through it. We're on some level, we're all dealing with stuff. And you have to understand that we're all figuring it out as we go and learning as we go. And let's lend those people our support, because I have witnessed a lot of situations where people are making choices, and it's so clear that they're making choices that they know are dangerous, but they're doing it because they're afraid of the public reaction. Because even though what we're doing and what we're asking you to do is to save lives, your irrational fears are causing them to make decisions that are like, okay, well, then I guess we're going to have to sacrifice some people. Some people are going to have to die because I don't want you mad, because I can't have you mad. And again, it goes back to the same thing I was talking about with belief. Sometimes I have made decisions, or my decisions have been slowed, from me making the right call, because I'm afraid of, well, what are people going to say? When I know what I'm saying is true, what I'm saying is right, what I'm saying is coming from a place of love. But because of your irrational fear about something that's not even real, but your irrational fear is causing us to suffer. So I'm just going to say that there's just too much of this attacking stuff, of going after folks who are trying to do the right thing. Now, not everybody's trying to do the right thing. There's certain people that are just playing a political game, and they just don't care. They're just worried about surviving for another political day and maintaining their power. But there are people in position, especially in our schools and stuff, like our principals and our superintendents and our school board, and all those folks. They're trying to make the best call they can. But it's difficult when, people are coming after them. And so they're like, well, I guess I'm going to do what you want me to do, even though I know the outcome is going to be there's some people who are going to get sick, and there may be some people who die. So we have to do our part. We have to get our act together and step up and we like to anyway. We need to step forward and do what's right. And at the end of the day, even if you only think of it this way, what's truly the worst that can happen? Like, what's truly the worst that can happen by wearing a mask? You're a little uncomfortable for a little while. Really? But that's more important than other people passing along this sickness and possibly killing some people. And even the people who aren't dying are now have these, I guess, side effects or whatever, but things that have happened to them physically that they now just have to live with for the rest of their lives. Some of it's the lack of taste, smell. And that's kind of innocuous, but but that has to do with the quality of life, right? Some with, the ability to, fully breathe, like there are certain people, who have been affected who now will have to live with something for the rest of their lives simply because certain people said, I don't want to wear a mask. And it's amazing to me when people look at me, especially when I'm not doing anything to you. And these are the very same people, I'd be willing to bet, who talk about their political freedoms, our freedom, I don't want the government stepping on my life. But yet you want to tell me whether or not I can wear a mask or not. You want to give me grief. You want to, you have these groups of militia and people and stuff who go yell in the faces of the police officers and military folk, the very one that they say we're supposed to respect, and claim that other people aren't respecting. You go and yell in their faces and risk them getting sick and then taking it home to their wives and children and family members. Like, come on, man. Just come on. We're better than that. We can be better than that. So recognize your fears, understand where they come from, and then take the time to try to be informed. And that's going to be it. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time. And we will see you again next week. In the meantime, embrace the possible, live long and prosper.